Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take. On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a pianist, guitarist, vocalist, and songwriter. My guest is currently a full-time keyboard player for Leo Sayer and Paul Young. He's also played keyboards and performed with several popular performers, including Melanie C, Rebecca Ferguson, the Overtones, Tulisa, Lulu and Nadine Coyle. My guest released his debut album Corners in 2007. 4 of the songs on the album were UK songwriting competition successes, and the bonus track, The Better Part of Me, won the UK Songwriting Contest Award in the Adult Contemporary category. My guest has gone on to release 2 further solo albums, Black and White Interpretations and Hearts and Stones. He's also the organiser, manager and promoter of Jazz at Future Inn, one of Bristol's popular music venues. I'm joined today by Steven Reid Williams, who discusses his life, his career, and of course, his musical endeavours. A warm welcome, and firstly, a happy new year to you. Thank you kindly for taking time out of your Friday morning to be a guest on Your Take. Good to see you.
You too, mate. No worries. And what an intro. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Happy
New Year again. And yeah, thank you kindly. Obviously, the whole purpose of the interview today is to kind of find out about your musical career, the people you've worked with, which we've named in the introduction. But I kind of like to obviously start back at the kind of very beginning, where it all kind of happened, the kind of foundations of your childhood. And I wanted to go back to, turn the clock back to 1976, where you were born, and just kind of simply ask you where you were born. And can you just tell us a little bit about your upbringing in the Williams household? Did you have any siblings? And I just want to find out just a little bit of detail on your parents, who they are and what family life was like.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for giving my age away. Yeah. Well, I was born in Bristol at the BRI in March 76. And yeah, it was a pretty typical upbringing, I guess. Nothing too remarkable. We lived in a part of Bristol that's now a little posher than it used to be, called Southmead. So that's where I spent the first 8 years of my life, growing up on a sort of council estate. Really, we were happy kids. We had great friends and played like all kids do, and it was nice. And then my family moved us down to Weston-super-Mare when I was 8 years old, and that was kind of a completely different environment. But that's what I remember most about my childhood is from then, really, from 8 sort of onwards, and also that's when pretty much around that time I started getting interested in music. So yeah, it was that kind of move. But yeah, my parents are Roland and Pat, and I'm very lucky that they're still around, and they've been together now for I don't know how many years, a long time. We had their 40th wedding anniversary a while ago. I'm sure it's more than that. I really hope they don't see this. I should know the number of years. But anyway, they've been together a long time. And I have an older brother called Paul and a younger sister called Joanne. And we're pretty much evenly spaced. So I'm a middle child. And yeah, there's about 4 years between us on either side. So yeah, 3 kids, 2 parents, and a few pets along the way. Nothing unremarkable. And it's been good. I've had a lot of love, and we're still a close family. And it's pretty much always been that way. So yeah, count myself as pretty lucky in that respect.
From coming from a kind of close, loving family, being brought up in the West Country, from Bristol and so on, you've already kind of painted a portrait. I wanted to kind of move on to your schooling and find out kind of where you were educated, and was that a happy experience for you? And when you finished senior school, did you go on to further education at all?
Yeah, well, if I'm allowed to say so myself, I was always quite an academic type So I really took to it. I can't say that I loved school, but I was very dedicated to it, and I worked hard. So so I had the honor of like winning a couple of awards, which seemed like a good idea at the time, but actually it singled me out as a bit of a nerd, which wasn't the most fun afterwards. I'll be honest, you know how kids can be. But yeah, you know, I had my fair share of run-ins with other kids and all that stuff. But on the whole, it was great. I mean, maybe I'm looking back through rose-tinted spectacles. I don't know, but I certainly, you know, it wasn't a bad time. But I do remember there were some challenges, like all kids face. You know, a few fights and a few bullies and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was good. And I got my GCSEs, and I thought I'll go on and do some A levels. You know, that's what everyone did back then, pretty much. You know, there were a few apprenticeships and things that people went off and did, but a lot of us went to sixth form. So I did 4 A levels, and then if you did that, again, it was kind of the accepted practice for a lot of us that we went on to uni. I don't know, it wasn't really, it didn't seem like a conscious choice as far as I was concerned. It was like, yeah, of course I'm going to go to uni. Of course I'm going to do my A levels. It was just like that for me. Education was always a really important part of my life, even though I was really into music at that time. And I kind of knew that being a successful musician didn't rely on having an education, you know, in the most cases. I did it anyway. So yeah, I went and did a degree in music and English. And that was good also, finding my feet, trying to work out what kind of person I was, as all people do, I think, at uni. Bit of independence, getting away from my parents for a while and living on my own and all those kind of things. It was a good experience all round, again, with its own set of challenges, but I came out of it all right, I think.
You kind of told us that kind of academia kind of came quite naturally to you, and you kind of built up a lot of life experience during your university years. I kind of want to find out though whether the kind of music, the interest and love of music came from not just listening to it and seeing bands and artists live, but also performing music yourself. How did you initially become interested in kind of music, and kind of what were you listening to kind of early on? What was the first music you were introduced to, and how did that go from that love of music to actually start playing instruments?
Yeah, well, I always credit this to my dad, because he's a very avid player. Not so much anymore actually, but he was a very avid player of records. You know, when I was a kid, and all three of us grew up with that kind of musical foundation, good music. You know, he had great taste in music, still does, and that's my dog having a cough there. And that's what we grew up with. So I think that has to be an important part of it, the fact that, you know, we had that foundation. But in terms of playing instruments, you know, my brother was bought a keyboard when he was a kid and didn't really take to it, and I just kind of picked it up and ran with it, really. But there are so many things along that route, you know, that I think are pivotal. One for me was having a great music teacher at secondary school, who's still a good friend of mine. You know, he encouraged me to do things like, well, join a choir, you know, which I wouldn't have thought of doing. But at the time, you know, saying, well, okay, I like playing piano. Why would I want to? But, you know, it was obviously important working with other people, being a part of an ensemble and learning those musical skills, and obviously learning how to sing as well, which has become probably the most important part of my work, you know, in the last 10, 15 years. So those kind of things, encouraging me along the way, you know, and that's why I'm a massive advocate for good musical education, because without it, you know, people like me wouldn't exist. I don't think. You need that initial kick up the arse to do those things. But like I said to you, you know, before the interview when we were chatting, you know, if music isn't your thing, for me it was the thing that got me to school early. And I was in the practice room, and it was on my break times and lunch times, and after school as well. When I wasn't hanging out with my mates, I'd be in a practice room, you know, banging away on the piano, and you couldn't really have stopped me. That was the thing. Like, I had to beg my parents to buy me a new keyboard if I wanted a better one. you know, and that's the difference. It wasn't like anyone was pushing me or making me have lessons, or, you know, no horror stories about old piano teaching, you know, ladies putting piano lids down on my hands or anything like that I hear all the time. You know, I had to do it. You couldn't have stopped me, and that just carried on, really. You know, that I've had other passions in my life, but nothing is, you know, nothing is all encompassing as music. So
next, I wanted to kind of ask you the obvious question from what you've just said. You said you were brought up on really good foundation of good music. I want to kind of ask you what kind of music, what artists you were listening to, and
yeah.
secondly, you're a believer in good musical education, and that obviously takes dedication, persistence, because you're never going to progress at an instrument if you don't dedicate the time and, you know, learn the necessary skills and requirements. I was going to ask how you go from that love of playing as a passion, as a hobby and so on. How do you go from that to all of a sudden performing professionally? How did that kind of transition happen?
Yeah, well, so back to the first part of the question, in terms of the music that I was into and inspired me, that's always been fairly eclectic. It's better now. My mates were into bands that I didn't like at the time, for instance, like, you know, Rage Against the Machine. I didn't quite get it. Now they're one of my favorite bands in the world, you know, and you know, your tastes kind of grow as your musical awareness grows. But when I first started out, I loved the blues, you know. I was just really into that, which is a good place to start because it's a foundation of all, you know, sort of modern Western music. So I became really interested in that, and I got quite good for a youngster at playing blues and boogie styles and those kind of piano styles that you don't really hear that much anymore. But that then progressed and I got more into the pop music side of things and started to learn, you know, about other styles, soul and Motown and country music. And I pretty much embraced it all. The only thing I didn't embrace, perhaps, which would be a failing, I think, is the classical music side. So I left that alone. I wasn't so interested in that. I could appreciate classical music, but I never learned to play it very well. That bit me on the arse when I went to uni because I had to play it. Otherwise, I couldn't have got my degree. So, but I had a crash course at that point. But yeah, up till then, it was those kind of styles, and actually my musical career since then has involved nearly all of them, because the kind of work I do, the session world that I'm involved in, it covers so many styles. So although those list of names you gave out there, they cover, you know, the kind of the pop world, don't they? I suppose that might consider quite a narrow band, but it's not actually. Within those artists and their style, there are so many different styles that they do. Leo, for instance, covers all kinds of styles, from straight ahead pop to blues to gospel to kind of country infused stuff. So it all comes into play, and you have to know your chops, and you can always tell when someone knows those things because it's in their listening, it's in their mental repertoire of music that they've grown up with and listened to and understood, and that, you know, that's not an academic thing. So you can't sort of learn those things in the traditional sense. You just have to be exposed to it and be interested in it and want to replicate it, you know, and that's how it works. But in terms of getting from there to actually making it a career, well, I'm obviously, I can talk about how it happens for me. How it happens for other people, I'm sure, is different in every case. But how it happened for me was that when I left uni, I needed a job, and I actually became a teacher for a while, college lecturer, in you know, teaching music, so music technology and also sort of some performing arts. And one of my students, who was a part-time student, was Beth Rowley, who you interviewed recently.
Oh wow!
And so that's how we initially met. So I ended up doing some gigs for her. So I played piano for her on a few gigs. And shall I go on ahead and tell the story, or?
Yeah, you carry on. I'm interested to hear. Yeah, how it all. Well,
because I can be very specific about it. You know, it's a very specific story into the music industry. So basically, we did a gig in London at a place called the Bedford, which is in Balham, and it still is a sort of a showcase place for up and coming artists. And Beth at the time was an up and coming artist. And at the same gig were a band called Riccardi, and they were doing their own material. There's 4 guys, and I remember watching them, thinking, wow, these guys are amazing. I'd only sort of been playing with guys from Weston-super-Mare who also still amazing, but in a different way. And I saw these guys from London really had their stuff together, and their harmonies were amazing, and the musicality was amazing. And so I wanted to meet them afterwards, and I did meet them, but they felt the same way about me. We had a kind of a mutual love and respect for each other's musicianship from the word go. And ever since then, they were the starting point, I suppose, for all the work that's kind of branched out. So it was those guys that I did my first sort of kind of pro pop gig with Jamelia all those years ago, which again is a story in its own right, which I can keep kind of short. But essentially, after meeting the guys, about a year later, they phoned me and said, "Look, can you fly out to Kazakhstan, like now, basically, because our keyboard player is ill, basically, like he can't do the gig." So I had to learn the stuff in about 4 hours, Jamelia's set, and then I rushed to the airport and flew out there. They put me in business class because they were so chuffed that I jumped on and worried that I hadn't had any sleep and all that kind of stuff. And we got to Kazakhstan. I'd been talking through the set with the guitarist, and we did that first gig. And it was the combination of that and hanging out in the hotel lobby, having a jam on the hotel piano, that those guys then became proper musical friends and comrades. And we've been working together ever since. And that has branched out. So I still work with those guys, for instance, with the Overtones. So there's still the same guys on that. And it was the same guys who were with Mel C and Tulisa. But those things then branch out. So like Leo Sayer and Paul Young, those guys, they don't have anything to do with those acts. But as is with the music industry, when you network, things branch out and you meet lots of new people. And now, the scope of my sort of musical friendships is much wider. But it all started at that initial point when I said yes to doing a gig in London, which I think paid for my petrol there and back. So that's long-winded.
From that starting point and those kind of chance meetings, those opportunities, those gigs, we'll kind of move on to your musical career, which is an incredible journey. But mentioned at the top of the interview some of the people you've worked with and performed with, some of the names we mentioned, from Melanie C, Rebecca Ferguson, Lulu, Nadine Coyle as a keyboard and piano player. But I kind of wanted to just ask how that kind of session work evolved, and what's the experience been like to work with, like you say, so many different artists who obviously bring about different talents, different skills, and also work across so many different kind of styles.
Yeah, well, I think when you factor in the first encounter, like I said, and we had that first gig, I think after that point, that I suppose that was my chance, my shot. And so after that, I suppose it's the proving time, isn't it? And you have to show yourself to be capable. And we were all much younger, and we were all still learning as we are now. And so I was in the same boat with those guys. No one was sort of, I don't know how, no one was really assessing me in that sense, like I just joined an already established thing. We were all just learning this stuff together, and we were developing our style. But once you find a group of people that you love working with, and and perhaps more importantly, are strong friendships, it's kind of hard to break away from that. Like, you want to stay together, you want to work together because you know each other musically, and you get used to each other's kind of musical idiosyncrasies, and so that's why a lot of people end up working together for years, because bands often don't change their members. Some do, but they want to have that continuity and that sort of bonding that you get in the friendship, which translates into better music, better playing together. But it's partly about reputation as well. So if someone hears that you're good, I've been recommended for many jobs, and I feel privileged to have been so. Someone will say, "Oh, we need a keyboard player. Do you know anyone?" And someone will put me forward, you know, do you know a singer? So it's word of mouth and reputation and all of those things. And I think, because I asked this question quite a lot by young musicians who, you know, sort of want to break in. And I'm always aware that there's especially today with social media, there's a strong culture of networking. You know, that whole kind of, I need to be in the right place at the right time thing, and I'll make that happen. And I kind of admire that in a way. But all I can say is that although that might have worked, perhaps on some level, my career has been very organic. I've not really had to try in that sense to sort of form connections and, you know, make things happen. It was just a very, you know, organic process of meeting people. They became my friends. We worked together musically. That led on to other musicians, you know, and other groups and other managers and other tour managers and other artists. And, you know, at one point I was tempted to move to London and go, right, I'm going to go to all the jam nights and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure that's a great idea. I'd never put anyone off doing that. But for me, it wasn't like that. It was just a very, you know, simple process of going with the flow. And obviously along with that comes practicing and making sure you're good at your instrument. Being reliable, you know?
I wanted to ask you, when you say about going along with the flow, from your perspective, being a musician who can work in kind of so many different capacities, which you have done. You've done obviously touring gigs with various high profile artists. You've come in as a session man. You do songwriting. You also do private functions like weddings, events, and so on. For you, do you kind of like that variety than rather be tied in a band with, say, 4 other musicians and you kind of feel, you know, you're almost part of a family, but you're just tied to that specific role, that specific band, having to play the same songs over and over again? For you, is that nice to kind of have that creative flexibility and that freedom?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely, it is. I saw a really funny sketch recently about the drummer from Coldplay. About he's got the best job in the world because he gets to be in Coldplay, but no one knows who he is. And there's some kind of truth in that. You know, he gets to do that one amazing band with all those amazing songs, but without the stress, I suppose, that comes with, you know, the lack of anonymity that maybe Chris Martin has up front or someone like that. And, you know, I'm not on that level. But for me, what makes my job better, I think, is the fact that I don't have to do those same songs all the time. You're right. A tour is the closest you'll get to that. You know, if you're on a 2-3 month tour, which is actually quite rare these days, but, you know, by the middle to the end of the tour, you can get a little bit sidetracked mentally and start doing, you know, mental shopping lists while you're playing, you know, because musical repetition is kind of the death of creativity in a way. And it's still a part of the job I enjoy, and I like nailing things down and making sure I'm doing a good job and doing the parts that I'm required to do. You know, that's also really satisfying. But over a long period of time, that can lose its edge a little bit. So yeah, I like doing other things. I like doing my solo gigs, because I like being the center of attention, or there's probably some of that in there, but it's complete autonomy. You know, I get to do exactly what I want to do, sing what I want to sing. So there's that. But I also love being part of people's special days. Like, you know, some musicians look down on weddings and birthday parties and things. And I really don't. I take a lot of pride in that. And I try and make sure that I do a really good job, because I think that's just as valid a part of the music industry. And between you and me and everyone watching, it's the part that pays the best. You know, so why not do it? So I value that. And I also love being in the studio, which is a completely different kind of skill altogether. Shutting yourself away from the sunlight for several hours in the studio and doing that kind of thing, that's also extremely satisfying when you're doing it with the right musicians. And I love to be at home on my own, songwriting and recording here. Yeah, all of those things have their place. And if I were to do any one of those things and just one of those things, I think I would be bored. So yeah, I like the variety. Yeah.
You've been a full-time keyboard player for Leo Sayer, you've mentioned during our conversation, and as well Paul Young. I want to find out how you were introduced to both performers and what have you learnt from performing and touring with them, and also kind of their experience in working in the music industry.
Yeah, well, they're both fascinating examples from my point of view. I won't name specifics, but I've worked with people over the years who I've really enjoyed working with, but who maybe the music doesn't do that much for me. And I think all session musicians would have to say that's sometimes the case, you know. But you give it your all anyway. But with these two guys, with Leo and Paul, both of their repertoire, their songs are right up my street. So I can't remember which came first. I think it was Paul Young that came first. And that was a recommendation. So my friend Paul Stewart, he's the drummer for a band called The Feeling, you might remember.
Yeah, I do remember them well, yeah.
Yeah, and he still is, they're still going. And we'd met on another gig. So we'd met doing a country gig with a chap called Sam Outlaw, who's a country guy from California. And we both, again, recommended by other people who've then come together and done this country gig. So we'd met. And then the Paul Young gig came up for him. They needed a keyboard player. He called me. So again, it's that same sort of thing. You do a good job. Again, that country gig was, I think it paid next to nothing, but we all loved the music. We want to do this gig. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll do that. And so we all did a great job, put our homework in. And as a result of that, something else came out of it that's actually been a staple of my career for the last few years, which is touring and playing with Paul Young. So that's how that one came about. And with Leo, that was my friend David Troke, who's an amazing bass player, who you should also interview. He's got way more stories than me. He was playing for Leo at the time. He said, "Oh, we're playing near you, Steve. Do you want to come to a gig?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to. I love Leo set." Again, my dad played a lot of it when I was a kid. So I went to that gig and I saw it, and I said to him afterwards, I said, "Man, if that keyboard gig ever comes up, I'd love to do that." And sure enough, a couple of years later, the keyboard player couldn't do the tour anymore. So Dave said to Leo, "Look, I know a guy. Here he is. Do you want to try him out?" And that was it. You know, I don't think I even auditioned. I think he just took his word for it. and
The rest
I
is
was there
history, so to speak.
yeah, and day one I was there in rehearsals, and that was an amazing day. I remember being in rehearsals a little bit nervous because obviously, I'm the new boy and all these amazing songs. But then we started playing one-man band, which is an easy job for the piano. So I kind of just sat back a bit and listened, and I thought, how amazing that this song, this like iconic song, is now being sung by the guy who originally sang it, and I'm here in the band, and that was a really nice moment.
From touring and performing and being a session man with so many musicians that you've kind of given us stories and backgrounds to, I want to talk about the songwriting process and producing your own material. I want to ask you, how do you go about writing your own songs, and where does kind of that inspiration come from to kind of write songs? Does it come from everyday experience, things that have happened in your life? How do you kind of come up with the ideas for the songs, and what kind of songs do you like writing?
Yeah, well, for me, songwriting is probably the most, if I had to pick one, it's probably the most fulfilling thing that I do. But I think that's because it's obviously it's the ultimate form of expression, isn't it? For me as an individual, it's whatever I want to say, not what someone else is saying, which I'm happy to do as well. But this is my story, my songs, my lyrics. So that said, again, there's another question I'm asked quite a lot. How do you write songs? What's the process? And again, it's different for everyone. But for me, it's a combination of lived experience, personal experience, relationships, and those kind of things. But also, it can be entirely made up. Songwriting is a craft, and once you know the rules and you understand the craft, and you get any good at it, it doesn't have to be. I know some songwriters will disagree, but it doesn't have to be 100%. How can I put it? Genuine is not the right word, but this idea of songwriters always scribbling ideas back on, on the back of, whatever, napkins and things, because they've had a memory or something. That does happen, but often it's about sitting in a room and going, right, I need to write now. What am I going to write about? And so if you're good with words and you understand language a little bit, and you know how to, the rules of the game a little bit, and maybe you like poetry or literature, those things all feed into your songwriting, and you can create something from scratch that maybe you don't have any experience of, perhaps firsthand.
I kind of totally get where you're coming from. Like, from my point of view, loving certain lyricists, for me, my favorite ones, I kind of class them as narrative storytellers. And I kind of almost see the songwriter as being kind of on the same level as somebody writing a screenplay.
Exactly.
They're creating a story. And sometimes across an album, you might get a theme across that album of them telling a story, a journey. So I kind of totally get where you're coming from. Yeah.
Imagine if the only movies or novels were about someone's personal experience. How boring would that be? I've had an interesting life, but not that interesting. So you've got to go outside of your scope. You have to speculate. You have to imagine what something might be like. What would it be like if this thing happened to me, or if I felt this way? It's okay to make that up. If you can't do it in songwriting, where can you? So, but then again, there are other songs that are deeply personal, and whether you can spot the difference or not, I don't know. But yeah, any album I've ever done, or any songwriting I've ever done, is a combination of those two approaches, or maybe something in between. Maybe everything comes from some kind of experience. You just interpret through your own experience, your own lens, don't you? But that doesn't mean I only write about things that have happened to me. So yeah, branch out.
We go back to 2007 when you released your first solo album called Corners. I want to just ask you about the process of making the album, and just give us a little bit of a flavour of the songs you recorded, and also collaborating with Beth Rowley, you've mentioned, and saxophonist Ben Castle, and some of the other notable musicians that are on the album.
Yeah, well, that's all really about calling in favours. That happens a lot, and people have done it to me too. Steve, can you come and play on my album, or sing on whatever? And that's how the community works. If you know someone well enough, you may not have to pay them. And if you don't, then I like with my last album I've just done. There are some people who came along and did it for nothing, because they just wanted to be involved in the music and in the project, and other people who I felt like I needed to pay properly. So collaborations can come about in all kinds of ways. But with that album, Beth obviously was a friend, and she sang a song on the album for me, which is still one of my favorite songs, I think, that I've written. And I think I caught her at a particularly good time, because she, at the time, I don't know, she probably wouldn't agree, but she just started doing some gigs where she was singing much more forthright, much more bluesy, edgy kind of vocal, and she sounded great doing that. But actually, the part of her voice that I really loved the most was the gentle side, the slightly softer side, and that's what I managed to, I think, capture on that song, on that album. And at the time, Ben was her partner. So again, and a friend of mine. We've worked together lots of times over the years. So I just sent the track to him. I said, "Look, Ben, just do whatever you want to do on this." It came back about 2 days later, covered in amazing brass lines. So, it happens in different ways, but mainly it's about finding the right people for the job. What does a song need? Will it be helped by someone else singing it? Give up your ego a little bit, because I'd like to sing that song, but actually Beth sang it better than I would have done. So she was the right person to do it. Or a solo, like with a solo on a track. Well, I could do a piano solo there. I could make the whole album about me, but actually I think it'd be better if I got my friend Alex Hutchings in to play some guitar on it instead, And it's all about trying to see the the bigger picture and not be too self-involved. I think I like working with other musicians, and I like what they do. So I think that carries over into my songwriting as well. If I'm playing in a band, if we're live, I like hearing the guitar player do a solo, you know, and supporting him and just doing my job in the band. And I think, you know, when you put songs together, it's the same way. What's the best for this song? And it could be any number of other people other than yourself. So call in as many favors as you can. Get different flavors on your music. I think is good.
During our conversation, we've spoken in depth about variety, all the different musical disciplines you've been involved in, from being a session man, from songwriting, recording as a solo artist, and touring and performing. Which area would you say excites you the most, and which one kind of gives you most creative license?
Well, as I said, I think for me it's the songwriting.
Yeah,
it's the loneliest out of all of those, because I love being sociable. I like working with other people. But at the initial songwriting stage, you're very much on your own. Well, at least I am. I don't collaborate on songwriting. That's a personal choice, but I've tried it. It didn't go that well. But so yeah, I like doing that. I like being on my own at some points, and just with my own thoughts, and just with the piano, or just with a guitar. Nothing is better than that. I don't think. You know, it's complete creative autonomy, isn't it? You can do whatever you like in whatever style you want. You can say whatever you want, and a lot of it doesn't even get heard. You know, there are plenty of songs that I'll never play to people, and songs that I've forgotten I ever wrote. That doesn't matter so much. It's just, as a musical process, I think it's the most fulfilling. It's the most engaging for me, I reckon.
we go back to turn the clock back to 2008, and roughly about 12 months on from the release of the first solo album, and you won the adult contemporary category in the UK songwriting contest for the song The Better Part of Me. Did winning the award create new opportunities to write songs for other performers? And do you think it made people more aware of you and your music?
Well, the short answer, I'm afraid, is no. It didn't really do anything. I thought at the time it might, and I was chuffed to win. I really was. I was quite proud of myself, which actually is quite a rare thing. Like, to go, hey, I've achieved something, you know, because we're all very self-critical musicians. It's quite hard to get us to say, yeah, I think I did something well. But I was chuffed. I was chuffed to win, and I know that the year before, the winner had been signed up with, I think by Simon Cowell or something like that. I think it was. You know, I thought, well, that's not entirely up my street, but at least it's something. It's a progression into the music industry, perhaps. But no, none of that happened. I did a few interviews.
No.
There was a little bit of radio play, a little bit of interest. One very sweet artist covered the song somewhere, and you know, so those kind of things happen. But no, not really. Maybe more significant was the Radio 2 one. I didn't even win that, but I was a finalist, and I did get a few more kind of messages about that and a bit more interest in my work. But it's hard, man. It's hard being a songwriter. It's hard being an independent, unsigned musician. You'll hear this a lot, and I suppose I'm okay with that. I always was. Some musicians are absolutely dying to break into the business and be famous. I've never been that way. I never wanted to be famous. I did want to write songs and to have them maybe listened to by more than a few people, you know, not just my mum, whatever. And that's it, really. And I've achieved that. But I'm certainly not well known for songwriting, as my Spotify numbers will testify. So it didn't change much at all, but that doesn't matter to me. And yeah, I don't even remember being that disappointed by the whole process. I was just chuffed to win, and I got on with my life.
I wanted to move back to the recording process, and it seems to me that many artists in their repertoire bring out a covers album. And I wanted to go back to 2015. You release an album entitled Black and White Interpretations. I just want to ask you why you covered the songs featured on the album, and really about the challenges involved in covering well-known material.
Yeah. Well, I did it because I have been playing and still do play covers gigs all the time. So solo piano and vocal gigs are a staple of my work if I'm not touring and doing the session work. So I wanted to do an album that reflected that part of my life too. So actually narrowing it down to 10 songs, I think is on the album, was really hard, because I know hundreds of songs, and I love hundreds of songs, and singing all those songs is, you know, I do almost every weekend. So to choose the ones that are on the album, it's a mixture of ones that I'm kind of well known for doing. So like my covers of That's a Little Fly, Walking in Memphis and Fast Car, for instance, I do all the time. And if you know my music or if you see me play, then those all come up almost every time. So those things like that went on the album. But I also wanted to do something unusual as well. I've never played live until I recorded it on the album. There's a track on there called Set You Free, the old Entrance 90s song. And somebody asked me if I would do a version of that for their wedding, for their entrance music. So I did, and I thought, actually, that works really well. So I did a version of it on the album with you know, full string section and everything. And that's been the biggest hit on that album, if you like. But I'd never done it live before that. And then a couple of the others are just ones I wanted to try. I Believe, When I Fall in Love, It'll Be Forever, the Stevie Wonder tune. Always loved that song. Again, never sung it myself, but I thought I'd love to give that a go. So it's a combination of well-worn classics that I've been doing for years and ones that I just wanted to have a stab at, basically. And the album's dedicated to my dad.
So far, the conversation we've spoken about, it's been a journey of opportunity, your passion for music, your drive. It sort of all came very naturally, and the opportunities that have happened and successes, and you've had a great, well-established musical career. But I kind of wanted to move on to a very sad and tragic kind of moment in your life, which I kind of remember being sort of living in Bristol and knowing a little bit about the musical scene. Mm-hmm. You experienced tragedy in your life when one of your closest friends, a well-respected guitarist named Charlie Derrick, was killed in a car accident in 2003. I wanted to just ask about your memories of Charlie as a friend and as a musician. And can you also tell us about the charity you set up in remembrance of him and to help young musicians?
Yeah. Well, Charlie, I met, how did I meet Charlie? Gosh, I don't even know. Someone introduced us. He was this young upstart, like, guitarist, and he was way better than he had any right to be. And everyone knew it as well. And we all, you know, anyone who was, I think I was 5, 6, 7, I can't remember, years older than him, but, you know, so I was sort of well into the music industry at that point, and he was just kind of starting out. And we were all the same. It was like, this kid is just ridiculous. He's going to be the biggest thing ever, and he's going to be in everyone's, you know, list for first place guitarist, you know, from here on. And sure enough, even in his short life, he was. Everyone wanted a piece of him, and I was lucky that I got to play in a band with him for probably getting on for 3 years. So I used to be in a blues band, the John Fenlon Blues Band, and he was the guitarist. In fact, that's how I met him. Of course it is. He was the guitarist before I was in the band. So that's how I met him, and we became very good friends. And to me, he was like a younger brother. And I used to pick him up for all our gigs because he didn't drive. And we had many adventures and lots of laughs. And we used to say he danced like I can't remember what the expression was. like something like an unwieldy wardrobe or something. He was so clumsy, you know. But he was a brilliant guy, and I think, you know, we'll never know for sure. But when that accident happened, you know, I think it was a combination of, you know, some of those things. I think his brain was elsewhere when he was driving. I think he was clumsy as well, you know, and we'll never know. But we lost him on that day, not long after he'd learned to drive, and it was an extremely sad day, and it hit us hard. And you know, it still does. It's funny. It doesn't matter how long time, you know, how much time goes by. You still, you know, think back to it, and it's funny. Maybe these days more about what he might have been, and how good he would have been. Because I'm sure he would have absolutely been, you know, a name by now, like a proper UK guitarist name. I've met a lot of great musicians in my time, and he was already great even at 19 when he died. He was just 20, actually. I think he just turned 20. So goodness knows where he'd have ended up. But yeah, but his legacy is still strong. You know, he was already teaching at that time, so he's got students, you know, and now much older and are playing and have been, you know, playing in the music industry for a long time. And the charity that we set up, but it's sadly no longer running. But that was set up initially by his mum, Jules, who's a good friend of mine, and she wanted to do something to make some sense out of it, I think, and to bring some good out of it. And we did. We raised thousands of pounds, and we gave instruments and lessons and musical experiences to loads of young kids who could never have afforded it. It's kind of hard to follow up now to see where all those guys are and what they've done with it, but I'm absolutely certain that some of those guys are now doing what they wanted to do, what they set out to do. But I do know a couple of guys who are very successful actually and doing really well, and that's probably, you know, in no small part to the funds that they receive from that charity. But after a while, Jules decided it was time to close it down, and you can understand why. You know, for her, it was a part of her life that obviously she's always going to remember, and we all remember Charlie really fondly, and every year we remember him, you know. But I think for her, it was the ongoing work involved in running that charity was a daily reminder of that sort of tragic accident, and so it you know, eventually closed down. But we're all really proud of what we did, and it's still something I'm proud of now that I was involved with.
Since 2014, you've run a jazz club in the city of Bristol. What made you decide to do this? And can you tell us about your love of jazz and what it's also been like to work as a musical promoter?
So so there's been a jazz club at that place for quite some time. It closed down several years ago, and we noticed that it had closed down. No one was using the space anymore. So I just volunteered my services as something to do. I can't tell you why, other than to say that I love jazz. I'm a big fan of the Bristol music scene and the jazz scene in particular. And I wanted to set up somewhere where jazz musicians could have somewhere really cool to play, because it's got a great grand piano there, which is very rare, and a stage, and it's basically almost dedicated space, even though it's inside a hotel. It's custom made almost for jazz, so that's what drew me to it, and I ran it for 6 years almost, until COVID shut us down, and we haven't started up since. So I can't tell you if or when it will be back. I'd like to think it will be back. Whether I'll be involved or not when it does, I don't know. So that's a breaking exclusive for you. I haven't told anyone that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to do it anymore. I had great times doing it. A lot of hard work went into it, and I'm sad that it doesn't exist anymore, which is the case for a lot of clubs up and down the country because of COVID. But there is a chance that it could start up again.
last year and during the pandemic, you released an album called Hearts and Stones. Can you just give us a little bit of background and information on the album and how it differs to your other two recordings?
Yeah, so, well, to clarify, the album is actually out next month. What I have done is release 3 singles from it so far. You'd be forgiven for not knowing that, because it was delayed so much that it should have been released ages and ages ago. So you would have read somewhere, I expect, that it was, but actually it's not out till next month. That was a project that started almost 7 years ago. It was Christmas 2000 and something, and I thought to myself, I would like to record a blues album because I wanted some fun. I don't know, I think I'd had a tough year, musically speaking. It had been quite dry and quite a slog for whatever reason. I thought, I want to do something fun. So I'd record a blues album. So I called up all of my musical mates, as many as I could possibly get hold of, and said, look, can we get together just before Christmas? And I thought I might have a good chance of getting a hold of them. Bear in mind, some of these guys are, pretty big names. I thought they're not going to come and do anything for me. But if I do it really close to Christmas, maybe everyone will have taken time off work and I'll be able to get them. And it worked a treat. So, I managed to get a whole bunch of us together, I think on the 22nd and 23rd of December that year. And we went to a studio and we recorded a bunch of essentially blues songs. But what happened in the process was that it turned out much better than I thought it would. And I thought, actually, this deserves to be more than just a kind of throwaway blues project. And so then I made the fatal decision to turn it into a proper, singer-songwriter solo, but with all these musicians on it, album. And the decision to do that meant that it's now taken years chipping away at it to get it finished. And one of the things that came out of COVID, one of the positives that came out of the pandemic, was that I was able to finish it. So that's what I did last year, was to get all those parts finished, get the vocals done. I actually had to do some more writing as well and put in another studio session because I didn't have enough material of the kind that I wanted to turn it into a proper album. But now what it is a blues-based, with a blues foundation album, which is also a pop album, partly country, partly Motown and soul. But it's still got that underpinnings of all the fun we had in the studio over those couple of days, with all the musicians in that one space, where I'd say, right, let's have so-and-so drummer now. We'd have 3 drummers there, and go, right, Ian Matthews, for instance, was there from Kasabian. So, right, can you come and play on this one? And my good friend Richie Blake would come, can you come and play bass on this one? And it was just like a weird musical free-for-all. And that's what came out of it, was this really great set of recordings that I wanted to turn into something more. So that's what I've done, and I hope you'll like it. I'm really proud of it.
Move on to my final question, and then we're going to move on to the quick fire questions that we ask all Your Take guests.
Yeah.
I've spoken to a number of musicians, been fortunate enough with Your Take, who have paved a successful career in the music business, and I kind of am fully aware how difficult it is to earn a living professionally as a musician, and becoming increasingly harder with the advent of streaming and the money that artists get from streaming, well-known streaming platforms. Mm-hmm. But my final question was, what advice would you give to young musicians now who want to follow in similar footsteps to yourselves and other musicians who want to make a living in the current music business as it is now?
Yeah. Well, let's go with the negative side first, I suppose. I think it was already getting quite hard to do my job when I started. I think it's becoming harder. I think if I can jump on my soapbox briefly, is that the music industry is becoming undervalued every day. The wages are becoming less. Certainly when you account for inflation and all that kind of stuff, but it's already quite tricky to make a living out of being a musician. you know, it's not like the heydays in the 80s, you know, for instance, when you could tour and probably retire or buy a new house at the end of the tour. Those days are long, long gone. There's a lot of competition and a lot of musicians who are prepared to play for next to nothing or sometimes nothing, you know, to break through. And I'm really torn on this because, as I told you in my first story, the reason I got into the music industry partly was because I went and did a gig for essentially travel money with Beth. And so I can't be upset with young musicians to go out and do that. But for me, there's a balance to be had. It's about valuing yourself, recognizing that all music needs to be paid for. I run a Facebook group, a Bristol musicians Facebook group, and our rule number one is that we don't offer musicians unpaid work. You know, so I'm very passionate about that side of it and people getting paid what they're worth. So, you know, my first advice would be to value yourself and to make sure that, you know, you're not just underselling yourself and therefore underselling the business and making it hard for everyone else. And I say that as someone who's pretty well established. In a sense, those things don't affect me too much anymore. If people want me, they know where to find me, and probably, you know, I'm in the kind of world where the fees are kind of not going anywhere, you know. So I'm probably, selfishly, I'm okay, but actually I feel it for the whole industry that there are other people and possibly me one day will be struggling for work because the whole thing is just being taken down and down and down. As music becomes more readily available, as you know, with Spotify and Tidal and all those kind of things, you know, our industry is being devalued. So that's number one. Value yourself, value your art, value your work, and make sure you get paid properly if you can, and keep the industry strong. Other than that, as I said, maybe don't network. Don't go out of your way just to meet people for the sake of it. Try and just make friends with people, genuine connections, and get out and play with people you want to play with, people who you feel musically like-minded with. Those genuine connections, I think, lead on to, like I say, a more organic way and longer lasting. You know, it's perhaps easy to meet people and to sort of shoehorn your way into the business, but I don't think it lasts. I think it's better just to make the music your primary interest. Get good at playing an instrument. Practice a lot. Play a lot with other people as much as you can. Try all kinds of music out with different kinds of people, different styles. Get used to having to adapt on the fly, and all those things will make you more useful as a musician, and they'll make you more sociable, used to being around different types of people. That's, for me, is the secret of being a success in the music industry. Being the best guitarist in the world is not enough. Sadly, you'd think it would be, wouldn't it?
But I thought so, yeah.
But it's not. It's about being really good at what you do, and you know, and also there's other factors. I'm sure there are plenty of piano players who can play better than me. I know there are, but it you know, it isn't just about that. It's the whole package. You're hanging out for 95% of the time, then you're on stage for the 5%, you know, and so there's a lot of that goes into it as well. So be a decent all-round individual who's good at their instrument.
Lovely note to come on to the last 13 questions. These are kind of just quick fire questions.
Yeah, I'll answer quickly.
Things you like, things you don't like. We ask all guests this just to kind of wrap up the interview. I'm always interested to hear and fascinated the answers. So, number one, what would you say, Steven, is your favorite pastime?
My favorite pastime is photography.
Moving on to cinema, which we've not spoken about at all, but obviously you're a creative musical man. I presume you enjoy movies. What would you say is your favorite film and why?
My favorite film is, there are many contenders, but I'm going to pick JFK, the Oliver Stone film.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, I'll give a quick qualification because I know this is the quick fire round. The reason is, it's because I went to Texas, I saw the grassy knoll in Dallas, and it piqued my interest in the assassination, which led on to a deeper fascination with all things American history and everything surrounding that period of time. I'm a bit of a nerd about, you know, American history from the 50s and 60s. And that film started that. And it's also a great film.
Likewise, I have a similar interest. And interestingly, Oliver Stone's just made a documentary on his interpretation of the Kennedy assassination, which is interesting, going from a fictional, based on Jim Garrison, I think it was,
Right.
leading the investigation, now to his kind of documentary take on it. It's worth a look at.
Yeah, it's a great film, and it's flawed, obviously, and many people don't agree with the conclusions that it makes. I'm not even sure I do, but it certainly sparked my interest, and it was the first time I realised, I think, that governments can't be trusted, which is a bit late to learn that, to be honest. But anyway,
from Oliver Stone now to novels, and I want to find out who your favourite novelist is.
Predictable, but Orwell.
Good choice. If you could have had a different profession outside of music, what would it have been?
A counsellor, therapist.
Who in life would you say has been your greatest inspiration?
Christopher Hitchens.
Incredible man, incredible mind, incredible debater, and a philosopher as well, I guess. Yeah.
Again, a quick qualification. He counts as my biggest influence because he managed to focus a lot of my frustrations and anger with religion, which I'd grown up with, put it across in a more healthy way. He was basically he allowed me to channel all of that frustration and anger, I suppose, difficulty that I feel about religion and Christianity and all those kind of things that I've experienced in my own life. And he put it in, he distilled it into the most eloquent arguments, and in a much more healthy, productive way. And so that was the first thing. But then obviously that led on to all of his stuff, his politics, and his progression in, from arguably from the left to the right, and everything he's ever had to say about almost anything. A fascinating bloke. And I wish I could have met him. And I wish
I totally agree. And I think a very sad loss to the world when you hear some of the people that debated with him. Tony Blair, for example, said what an incredible debater he was on the world stage. And
he was
amazing mind.
Yeah.
From Christopher Hitchens now to newspapers, the media. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I don't.
No.
You probably remember a time when everyone used to read a newspaper, and so do I. But no, I don't. To my shame, probably. Although I think I'd still feel uncomfortable about picking one. I feel like if I was going to have to read a newspaper, I'd have to read all of them. I'd never get anything done.
If you had to choose one, if you had to read one, is there one that you think that kind of is more my kind of political persuasion, or one that you kind of feel is kind of a bit more truthful and, more respectable and as a reputable?
I suppose rather than a newspaper, I would probably go for something, I don't know, like, no, let's not say that. Maybe, I'll tell you what, maybe I would go for the Independent as, in its original form, or its original intended form.
Yeah.
Is that a sensible answer?
I'll accept
a lot of
that.
people independent it's far from, but at least in its ethos,
We go from the British press now to your favourite food. What would you choose?
I'll say fried chicken for dirty food, Italian for posh.
Okay. This is a tricky one. A lot of people slip up on this one. Who would you say is your favourite cultural icon?
Yeah, that's a good question. A cultural icon could be a thing as well as a person, can't it?
Yeah.
I'll go for another predictable one. I'm going to pick Stephen Fry, because for me, he's the UK ambassador for reason, science, intellect, and the best possible argument there is for reading books.
He's another fascinating personality, and he's done so many different things, hasn't he? From comedy to television presenting to acting. Yeah, a man of many guises, many talents.
Yeah.
What would you say is your favorite curse word and why?
So we're obviously allowed to swear on this interview, right?
You can, yes, far
Okay.
away.
Well, it's got to be fuck, because it's the only one that is kind of universally useful for emphasis. You know, you can use it everywhere. It's got so many different, you know, applications. If you want to be more emphatic, use a fuck. You know, it's just brilliant. And I love I've got actually no issue with swearers. You know, throw in the odd cunt. Why not? You know, they're great words. They're Anglo-Saxon words, and they belong to us like all other words do. And I think not be afraid of them.
You're in good company with fuck, because pretty much everyone's pretty much chosen it so far. From curse words, what is your favorite place or holiday destination when you get some downtime?
What is my favorite place? That's a good question. New York. I'll pick New York. I haven't been for years, but I'd like to go back.
From the Big Apple now, I'll be interested to hear your answer to this, being a music man. Who is your favorite music artist, and what is your all-time favorite album?
Gerry Rafferty, a much underrated songwriter from Paisley in Scotland. And my favorite album of his, which therefore becomes my favorite album of all time, which is a daft thing to say because there are so many good ones, but as I've got to pick one, Sleepwalking, which is an album from 1980, which is a crossover between his acoustic and electronic kind of periods, and it's genius. And I'm the only person in the world who thinks that, probably.
I like the fact that you mentioned Gerry Rafferty, because I agree with you. He's somebody I don't know an awful lot about, but the music I've heard, obviously Baker Street, the famous tracks, Stuck in the Middle, Steelers Wheel, sorry, always good, catchy, really good musical numbers. So nice to hear his name mentioned.
I'm glad you know, Joe. Not many people do. He's well known for Baker Street, which is obviously his big hit from 1977. But he did so much more than that. That's not his best song, in my view. He's got albums and albums worth of classics, and he came out of that era just after the Beatles, and you can hear it as well in the music. But melodically, and you know, some of his writing is just off the charts good. It's not so good later on, perhaps in his career, but that happens a lot. But yeah, that album and a track on it, if I can wind back, there's a track on the album called, the last track on the album called "As Wise as a Serpent," and I recorded that. It's the only cover song on my new album, so I went and did a version of that on the new Hearts and Stones album, which will be out next month.
Your recommendation there, I'm going to go and listen to that tonight. I'm going to get into a bit of Gerry Rafferty. I think I need to.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, do it.
And the final two questions, we get really deep now. What would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Has it not already been deep? Feels like it.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. My greatest achievement to date. Oh gosh, that is a really tough one. I'm going to say, what can I say? I'm going to say leaving behind Christianity, leaving behind religion, and turning that into something good. Because actually, I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but a lot of people don't manage that. And I feel very lucky that I did. And that not part of that world.
And then finally, Steven Reid Williams, the final question: how do you wish to be remembered?
How wish remembered? I would like to be remembered as a good bloke, and I'll expand on that. Just I'd like to be remembered as a good musician, obviously, but I think I'd rather be remembered for being a decent guy, and whatever form that takes. So that will mean different things for different people. But I'd like to think whoever knew me would remember me as someone who was approachable, friendly, generous, I hope, occasionally an arsehole, I'm sure, but mostly a decent chap. That's all anyone can hope for, I think. I'm probably not going to change the world, sadly.
To conclude your take, a nice moment to wrap on. And first time I've met you, I've not met you. We're doing this obviously via Zoom, but I agree, you come across as a very nice, open, genuine person. I be perfectly honest with you. It's been a really interesting 60, 70-minute conversation. I know
Thanks, man.
interviews aren't always everybody's cup of tea, particularly creatives having to talk about the things they create. They sometimes often find it difficult, and it's not something they necessarily want to speak about in detail. But it's been a fascinating interview, and I thank you for your time and just giving a portrait of your life from the beginnings, what you've achieved, tragedy as well, and what's come out of that. And I've really enjoyed it, and I thank you for your time, and I wish you all the very best in this new year.
Well, thank you. Thanks for taking an interest in me. I'm honoured and flattered that you should do that. I hope it was useful in some way, useful for someone watching. They might get something from it. I hope. It's awkward as hell for me to do this. I don't know how it comes across, but I hate talking about myself in that way. Not always. Sometimes I'll give it a good shot. I'm happy to, but it is a hard thing to do, and you've made it easier for me. So well done. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And finally, I just wanted to ask you the simple thing, the publicity thing. How do we find out more about your work, your music, and how do we listen to it?
Yeah. Well, several years ago, I put my middle name into my name so that people could find me very easily. Otherwise, I'm just Steven Williams, and there are a million of us, including Elvis impersonators and politicians. But if you add the Reid in the middle, Steven Reid Williams, then I'm easy to find now. So you can Google me, and I've got a website, stevenreidwilliams.com, and my Instagram is instagram.com/Steven Reid Williams, and it's just become a useful tool because no one else, as far as I'm aware, has the same name. So right across all the platforms, that's how you'll find me.
Keep doing what you're doing. Keep your love of music, and I hope it becomes more easy, maybe more accessible for musicians, not just yourself, but all musicians, to keep doing what they do, be able to perform with obviously the difficulties at the moment, and make a good living from what they want to do.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate that. I will keep doing my best. And yeah, I'm hoping that it all gets back to normal as soon as possible for everyone's sake, not just the music industry, but everyone across all the sectors, because it sucks, doesn't it?
And thanks again for being part of Your Take.
Pleasure.